Hello and welcome to her revenge arc. This is a space dedicated to the quiet architects of justice, the women who, when faced with betrayal, do not crumble. Instead, they retreat into the silence, draft a new blueprint, and build a fortress of retribution so elegant and so complete. Their enemies don't even see the walls going up until it's too late. Today's story is about heritage, about the difference between a house and a home, and about the devastating power hidden in the fine print of a last will and testament. My name is Clara, and I am going to tell you how my mother-in-law stole my house, and in doing so, handed me her entire world. My life with the Thompson family was a lesson in subtleties, in learning to read the air in a room. For 10 years I was married to Mark Thompson, a man whose kindness was genuine but whose spine was, regrettably, made of something far more pliable than steel. His defining feature was his deference to his mother, Beatrice. To say Beatrice Thompson was formidable would be an understatement. She was a force of nature, a perfectly tailored Arctic front who believed the world was a chessboard, and she was its lifelong reigning queen. Every person in her orbit was a piece to be moved, and from the moment I entered the family, I was a pawn she could never quite get into position. I was not the daughter-in-law she had designed in her mind. My family tree had no gilded branches. I held no high-powered corporate title. I was a quiet woman who found solace in the delicate art of antiquarian book restoration. My world was one of patient, meticulous work, mending torn pages, restitching bindings, preserving the fragile stories of the past. To Beatrice, this was a charmingly dusty, but ultimately insignificant hobby. It was not a career, it was a pastime, and it marked me as someone unambitious, someone soft. She was wrong. Anyone who works to save things that are centuries old knows that softness is not the same as weakness. It requires a different kind of strength, a quiet, enduring resilience. There was one person who understood this. My father-in-law, Arthur Thompson. While Beatrice was the family's polished, formidable facade, Arthur was its warm, sturdy heart. He was a retired history professor, a man whose gentle demeanor belied a formidable intellect and a profound capacity for observation. He saw past the quiet surface to the core of things. He was the only Thompson who ever truly saw me. While Beatrice held court in her cavernous, minimalist living room, Arthur would often seek me out in my workshop, a converted garden cottage behind their grand estate. He wouldn't interrupt. He would simply pull up a wooden stool and watch, utterly captivated as I worked. He would observe my steady hands applying paste washes to foxed paper or tooling a new leather cover with 18th century brass implements. "It's a kind of magic what you do, Clara," he murmured once, his voice a comforting baritone. "You don't just fix the object. You honor its journey. You have a historian's soul." In those quiet hours, surrounded by the scent of old paper and beeswax, we formed a bond that became my anchor in the often chilly waters of the Thompson family. We spoke of forgotten battles, of the evolution of printing, of the lives lived between the pages of the books I was mending. He recognized my patience as a skill, my quietness as focus. He knew his son and he knew his wife. One afternoon, as I was repairing a beautiful but damaged copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "He's a good man, my Mark," Arthur said, a familiar note of melancholy in his voice. "But he's afraid of his mother's disappointment. It's been her most effective tool his entire life. You, Clara, are the strongest person in this family. Don't you ever let her convince you otherwise." It was a warning and a validation that I would cling to for years. The nexus of our story is a house. Not the cold, imposing Thompson mansion, which always felt more like a museum than a home, but a far more special place. It was Arthur's own childhood home, a lovely two-story Victorian with a wide front porch and intricate gingerbread trim, nestled on a street canopied by ancient oak trees. He had inherited it from his parents, and it was where he and Beatrice had lived as newlyweds, long before the fortune was made. On my wedding day, Arthur, to Beatrice's barely concealed chagrin, gifted the house to me and Mark. Beatrice called it our starter home, and constantly hinted it was time to sell up and move to something more appropriate. But for me, that house was the destination. It was a sanctuary. Its floors whispered stories with every creak, and the afternoon light, filtered through a stained glass depiction of St. George and the dragon on the stair landing, painted the hallway in jewels. Arthur had given me a piece of his own history, and I cherished it. We spent a whole spring together reviving his mother's old rose garden in the backyard. As we worked, our hands in the dirt, he told me stories of his childhood, of climbing the very oak tree that now shaded the lawn. The house wasn't just a building. It was a repository of love, a testament to my bond with the one man who made me feel like family. 2 years ago, a sudden aggressive cancer took Arthur from us. His passing was like the sun going out. The ambient warmth of the family vanished, and Beatrice's icy control expanded to fill the void. His loss was a profound personal grief for me, a silent, lonely ache. I had lost my confederate, my champion. The reading of the will was exactly as tense and sterile as you might imagine. We sat in a mahogany-paneled room in the offices of a law firm that had served the Thompsons for generations. Beatrice was the picture of grieving matriarchal power, her grief as impeccably tailored as her black suit. Mark sat beside her, looking pale and anxious, a ship untethered from its mooring. I was on the other side of the polished table, a quiet island of my own sorrow. Most of the will was predictable. Beatrice was the primary heir, inheriting the vast fortune, the portfolio of stocks, the mansion she so loved. Mark was granted a substantial trust fund, enough to ensure a life of comfort. And then the lawyer, a dry man named Mr. Abernathy, adjusted his glasses and read a final provision that shifted the tectonic plates of the room. "And to my cherished daughter-in-law, Clara," he read, his voice neutral, "I do hereby reaffirm my gift of the house located at 127 Elm Street to be hers alone, to do with as she wishes, though it is my deepest hope she continues to find happiness within its walls, as it holds the best of our family's memories." Beatrice's spine stiffened. A reaffirmation? That's redundant. The house is already in her name. "Arthur was a thorough man, Beatrice," Mr. Abernathy said smoothly. "He wanted to leave no room for ambiguity." He then continued reading, and this is where Arthur's true plan began to reveal itself. "Furthermore, the remainder of my personal discretionary assets, totaling a sum of approximately $2 million, is to be placed into a separate trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be Clara Miller." Miller? My maiden name. I felt a jolt, a silent electric shock. Mark glanced at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like ice cracking. "Miller? That's not her name." Honestly, Arthur's mind was going at the end. It's obviously a clerical error. The beneficiary is Clara Thompson. The will is an executed legal document, Beatrice. "It is quite specific," Mr. Abernathy countered, his tone unwavering. "It names Clara Miller. However, this particular trust comes with a rather unique condition. The funds are to be held by the bank and remain inaccessible until one of two conditions are met. Either the passing of 5 full years from the date of my death, or upon the confirmed sale of the property at 127 Elm Street. Should the property be sold, the full principal of the trust is to be released and transferred to the named beneficiary immediately." He paused, then added the masterstroke. "However, the will also stipulates that any action that results in the sale of that house, being in direct opposition to Arthur's stated wishes, will be considered a breach of faith. The party or parties found responsible for initiating said sale will, as a penalty, forfeit any and all claims to any other portion of the estate." Beatrice waved her hand, a gesture of grand dismissal. "It's a nonsensical muddle. A typo on the name and a ridiculous sentimental clause. The house won't be sold, so it's all moot." But I saw it. I saw the glint in her eyes, the flicker of calculation. In her mind, a puzzle had just presented itself. A $2 million prize locked in a box with the wrong name on it. And the key was a house she despised. The gears in her mind were already turning. She was already working out how to get the money that she believed rightfully belonged to the Thompsons. I remained silent. I kept my expression placid, my hands folded in my lap. But inside, a slow, profound understanding bloomed. Arthur had not made a mistake. He had seen the future. He had known his wife's avarice, her arrogance, her belief that rules were for lesser people. And he had laid a trap. A beautiful, elegant, patient trap. And in his final act of fatherly love, he had handed me the trigger. He trusted me to have the wisdom and the patience to use it correctly. My part in his plan began the following week. I went to the county courthouse and filed the necessary paperwork. I legally changed my name back to Clara Miller. It was a quiet, simple act. I told no one, not even Mark. When the official confirmation arrived in the mail, I placed it in a secure safe deposit box, along with a certified copy of Arthur's will. To the world, I was still Clara Thompson, Mark's wife. But to the state and to the bank that held a $2 million trust, I was Clara Miller. And then I waited. Patience, after all, was my art. The following year was a slow, steady war of attrition. Beatrice launched a campaign. She would appear at my house unannounced, her critical gaze sweeping over the very details I loved. "Clara, darling, you must be practical," she'd sigh, running a manicured finger over a slightly weathered windowsill. "This house is a relic. The heating bills must be astronomical. Think of the maintenance. Mark deserves a modern home. You both do. A luxury condominium downtown with a concierge. Effortless." Each time, I would offer her tea and smile a small, serene smile. "I'm perfectly happy here, Beatrice. It means so much to me that Arthur wanted me to have it." My gentle refusal was like a stone in her shoe. It was a small pocket of her world she could not control, a testament to Arthur's enduring influence over hers, and it drove her to distraction. Mark predictably swayed like a willow in the wind. "You know, Clara, Mom has a point," he'd venture after one of her visits. "We could get a great price for this place. Think of the freedom that would give us." "This is my home, Mark. It was a gift from your father. A gift to me. I would reply, my voice quiet but unyielding. He lacked the conviction to argue, but he also lacked the strength to defend me. He simply existed in the uncomfortable space between us. Beatrice's chance to make her move, the opportunity she had been waiting for, arrived cloaked as the greatest triumph of my career. I was invited to Florence for a 3-week professional residency. The Uffizi Gallery itself had requested my expertise to consult on the restoration of a newly discovered collection of Medici-era correspondence. It was an honor beyond my wildest dreams. As I packed my bags, a thrill of excitement warred with a deep sense of unease. I felt as though I were leaving my queen unprotected on the chessboard. Florence was everything I had hoped. My days were a sublime immersion in history and beauty. My hands touched paper that had been touched by Renaissance princes. I lived in a state of deep professional bliss. It was so consuming that I almost didn't register the subtle shift in Mark's phone calls. They became shorter, less frequent. When I asked about the house or the garden, his answers were vague. Everything's fine, Clara, really. Don't you worry about a thing. Just enjoy Italy. The call that shattered the dream came not from my husband, but from my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a dear woman who had known Arthur since he was a boy. Her voice was thin and worried over the crackling international line. Clara, my dear, I do hate to bother you, but I thought you should know. There's a large sold sign on your lawn. Men have been moving your things out all day. Beatrice is here, supervising. I was standing in the Piazza della Signoria, the magnificent statues of ages surrounding me. In an instant they all turned to gray stone. The warm Tuscan sun felt cold on my skin. The air in my lungs turned to ice. She had done it. She had waited until I was 4,000 miles away, and she had invaded my life, dismantled my home, and sold my sanctuary. A wave of pure primal rage washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. It was the fury of violation. And then, as quickly as it came, it receded, replaced by something else. A profound crystalline calm. The quiet thrill of a plan coming to fruition. The trap had been sprung. I did not call Mark. I did not scream at Beatrice over the phone. That would be messy, emotional. This was now a matter of clean, precise execution. I finished the last week of my residency with perfect professionalism. I completed my reports, bid farewell to my Italian colleagues, and flew home. I did not go to 127 Elm Street. I couldn't bear to see it occupied by strangers. Instead, I checked into a quiet hotel downtown. I ordered tea, sat by the window overlooking the city, and made one phone call. To Mr. Abernathy. He picked up on the second ring. Clara, he said, and I could hear the weary resignation in his voice. Let me guess. She did it. She did, I said. There was a long pause. Then he said, Arthur was a wise man. I'll set the meeting. My office. Tomorrow at 10. The next morning, I walked into that familiar mahogany-paneled room. They were already there. Beatrice sat in a wingback chair, radiating an aura of smug satisfaction. She was triumphant. Mark sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable, his gaze fixed on the Persian rug. He couldn't look at me. Clara, Beatrice began, her voice a masterclass in feigned concern. I know this must come as a shock, but it was an executive decision, Mark, and I made for your own good. That house was a weight around your neck. And you'll never believe the offer we got. Truly spectacular. I've already had the full amount deposited into a new joint account for you and Mark. We can go looking for a proper modern apartment this afternoon. It's a wonderful new chapter for you. She beamed at me, this woman who had just committed an act of profound theft, and was framing it as a generous gift. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then, I turned my gaze from her to Mr. Abernathy. Please, I said, my voice even and calm. Let's proceed. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. Beatrice, he began, his tone formal. In the matter of the sale of 127 Elm Street, you acted as the agent of the sale, did you not? Of course, she said proudly. Mark gave me his power of attorney to act on their joint behalf. It was all perfectly legal and above board. I see, the lawyer said, steepling his fingers. There is, however, a significant legal problem. The deed to that house, following the reaffirmation in Arthur's will, was held in a single name. And a year ago, that individual legally changed her name. The owner of record at the time of the sale you initiated was not Clara Thompson. It was Miss Clara Miller. You therefore sold a property for which you had no legal authority, using fraudulent representation. That is a felony. The color drained from Beatrice's face. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed shock. Mark finally looked up, his face a mask of dawning horror. Furthermore, Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice like chipping stone, the proceeds from that sale legally belong to the owner of the asset. That is Miss Clara Miller. The funds you deposited into a joint account for Mark and Clara Thompson were illegally diverted. I have already been instructed by my client, Miss Miller, to file the necessary motions to have those funds seized and transferred to her personal account. This is insane, Beatrice stammered, finding her voice. It's a trick. It is the law, Mr. Abernathy stated flatly. He picked up the bound copy of the will. Which brings us to the final matter. Arthur's penalty clause. The will is explicit. The party responsible for initiating the sale of the house forfeits all claims to the estate. Beatrice, by your own proud admission, that party is you. You have triggered the forfeiture clause. Your inheritance, the house, the stocks, the art, the entirety of Arthur's fortune is now null and void. He let that sink in before delivering the final crushing blow. And the will further stipulates that in the event of such a forfeiture, the entire estate passes in its totality to the secondary heir, the named beneficiary of the discretionary trust, Miss Clara Miller. The room was utterly silent. It was the silence of utter ruin. Beatrice was no longer a queen. She was just a pale, trembling old woman in an expensive suit, her entire world dismantled by a few paragraphs on a piece of paper. Mark was staring at me now, his eyes filled with the terrifying cocktail of disbelief, awe, and the sickening realization that he hadn't just lost his wife. He had been a pawn in the game that had destroyed his mother and his own future. No, Beatrice whispered, the word barely audible. Her eyes, now stripped of all their arrogance, found mine. They were filled with the raw, desperate hatred. You planned this. You set me up. I finally looked at her directly. I felt no triumph, no joy. Only a profound, quiet finality. No, Beatrice, I said, my voice as soft as the old pages I so lovingly restored. Arthur planned it. He knew you. He knew your greed was a more powerful force than your love, or your grief. He wrote the story. You simply followed his script. You did this to yourself with every decision you made. I stood up and smoothed down my dress. I looked at the broken man who had been my husband. It's over, Mark. You stood by and let her do this. You made your choice. I hope it was worth it. I walked out of that office and did not look back. I left the wreckage of the House of Thompson for them to sift through. The fallout was as catastrophic as Mr. Abernathy had predicted. Beatrice lost everything. They fought it, of course, but Arthur's will was ironclad. They had to sell the mansion. Mark, his trust fund gone, his inheritance forfeited, was left with nothing. He called me dozens of times. Voicemails filled with pleas, with apologies, with rage. I deleted them all without listening. I am Clara Miller. I am an exceptionally wealthy woman. I never set foot in my old house again. I had it sold, legally, and the proceeds now fund a foundation in Arthur's name that provides grants for historical preservation projects. I have moved to a city by the sea, where I have opened a studio that is the envy of my field. My life is my own creation, built on a foundation of patience, and funded by the arrogance of my enemies. It is a quiet life, a beautiful life. It is my masterpiece. And so I ask you this, when you are faced with an adversary who believes they hold all the power, is the greatest revenge to fight them on their own terms, or is it to create a new game entirely, a game whose rules they don't even know they are playing until the checkmate is called? Thank you for listening to her revenge arc. If my story spoke to you, please share it. Like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice meticulously served. I look forward to reading your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below.